Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the real Yemen beyond the headlines.
It's easier for people to focus on the Houthis in the context of what's going on in Gaza, not in the context of what's going on in Yemen.
Beyond shipjackings in the Red Sea and handsome pirates on social media, what does the future hold for a country where more than 18 million people need humanitarian aid? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. They call themselves Ansar Allah, the partisans of God. And they have a knack for inspiring viral content created by reverent voices on the internet sympathetic to the Houthis' foreign policy in solidarity with the Palestinians. Though certainly not palatable for all tastes, this song is one of the earworm tunes that's been making the rounds on social media. In it, Yemeni comedian Mustafa al-Mamri mocks Israel and its Western allies. It implies that for all its financial and military muscle, they are unable to stop the Houthis from wreaking havoc in the Red Sea. But the Houthis haven't been a global household name for very long. Since the 1990s, the Houthis' goal had been to end U.S. and Israeli presence in the region. They claimed to be die-hard anti-imperialists. Hailing from Yemen's mountainous north, they became prominent during the civil war that followed Yemen's revolution of 2011. They took control of the capital, Sana'a. And after a Saudi-led coalition started to get involved in Yemen's civil war, the Houthis started to receive more and more support from Iran.
For someone who's really not familiar with Yemen, I could say they look really exotic because we're not really, as an international audience, paying attention to Yemen for a long time. My name is Afrah Nasser. I work as a freelance journalist and also a non-resident fellow with the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. I speak to you from Stockholm in Sweden. I've been covering Yemen over the past 15 years.
So Afrah, you're Yemeni living in Stockholm in exile. I'm curious what your reaction is to this new reputation that they've had. You know, you've seen this video of Houthi Chalamet, as they call him, this dreamy-eyed, floppy-haired young man sailing around a cargo ship. How does this image square with the Houthis that you've seen close up?
This image, to me, is a reminder of the Houthi propaganda that they have mastered over the past 10 years now, since they took control of the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. Believe it or not, the first thing they did wasn't to go to the presidential house or to certain ministry. The first thing they did, the Houthi armed group then, was to bomb the TV and the radio, the state radio, state TV. And that was a testimony that media, controlling media, was a priority for the Houthi armed group. So what we're seeing today in like what's happening in the war on Gaza isn't surprising to me.
But this image of sort of strong, powerful, bright-eyed young men, there is another side to that coin. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the other side, if you talk to someone who is inside Yemen, living under the control of the Houthi armed group, would have different reaction. First, Yemenis are not surprised of what the Houthis are doing. Since day one of their dreams was to liberate Palestine. This is not like something new to Yemenis. But what is very contradictory is the conflicting position from the Houthi towards Yemenis inside and the way their attitude to Palestine. Every Friday, the Houthis gather Yemenis in a big protest in solidarity with Palestine. Houthis exploit very well the passion and solidarity that so many Yemenis have already for Palestine, and they use that to serve their own interests. Houthis could use this momentum actually to recruit more and more people in the fight, in the armed fronts of the Houthis, whether to fight invaders or Israel or any other actor. But also it served their interest today to make a statement that they are a powerful actor on the regional and global stage.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about some of the actions that have put the Houthis in the headlines in 2024, specifically their actions in the Red Sea and their direct attack on Israel. Can you explain to us how the Houthis have been involved in Israel's war on Gaza and why you think it's resonating with Palestine supporters both in the West and across the Arab world?
So since the beginning of the war in Gaza, we saw outspoken statements from the Houthi armed group.
The number of martyrs and missing people has reached more than 39,000. These are not just numbers passing through people's ears, but they are souls of people being lost and whose lives are being destroyed, and the wounds and suffering of a people being annihilated, and a comprehensive targeting of life with total savagery and aggression,
which quickly translated into military action.
Houthi fighters in Yemen started targeting what they say are Israeli-linked ships in the Red Sea, shortly after Israel's war on Gaza began.
We saw Houthis going with all these military attacks as if there is no tomorrow.
Yemen's Houthi group has claimed responsibility for a drone attack near the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv.
Houthi attacks on commercial vessels in the region have forced some of the world's largest shipping companies to suspend operations in the Red Sea.
Houthis didn't shy away, and it was an opportunity to show that they have their own military decision away from their allies. And here I speak in particular about Iran. To give them credit, what they did was completely brave, and it was something unprecedented given the lack of solidarity from other Arab states. But I would say it was like the wrong person doing the right thing. Because back home, Houthis have a huge and terrifying human rights violations records. That includes arresting and detaining arbitrarily thousands of Yemenis.
So it's a real irony there, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. What I find it very troubling, especially with the Arab fellows and sisters, it's like they don't want to hear when they say, but Houthis in Yemen doing so many wrongdoings. And yet they clap for them in what they're doing in Palestine. And I think it's very frustrating because as a Yemeni, we can be against the Houthi practices and human rights violations and the occupation in Palestine. It's so simple. Why is it difficult to have this position at home and outside?
I want to ask you about the domestic situation, and I just want to give a little bit of background for the listeners. Remember, this is a split country. The country has remained divided, with the Saudi-backed government still controlling parts of the south of Yemen. Would you say that the Houthis' actions in connection with the war on Gaza have actually helped them consolidate their power domestically?
Indeed. Houthis' foreign policy, if we can say it, today is intended to consolidate their power back home. But also the Houthis showing this military high capacity have made the neighbors kind of extremely concerned about going in direct confrontational with them. And that includes Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a short-lived period because the group cannot sustain this position for a long time. The grievances at home are growing by the minute, not even by the day, by the minute. the dire economic situation in the areas controlled by Houthi, where the majority of the population live, is getting worse and worse. As we speak, there are almost daily flooding happening in different areas in Yemen.
Now, heavy flooding caused by torrential rains in Yemen overnight has left 45 people dead in recent days. Furthermore, a number of homes were destroyed and more than several cars were swept away. United Nations.
It's a reminder that there is lack of governance by the Houthi armed group and other Yemeni factions as well. And that will, in my opinion, sooner or later will make the population really explode in anger.
How Afrah and Yemen got here. That's after the break. So Afrah, I'd like to ask you about your personal story. As we said, you live in Stockholm and you don't live in Yemen. Can you walk us through how you ended up so far away from home?
Yes, well, it's a very long story, but I will try to make it short. So I started working as a journalist since 2008 or 9 until 2011 when the uprising happened and I started to write about the political development in Yemen.
Another day, another protest. Another long-serving ruler under pressure from his people to step down. Thousands of anti-government demonstrators in Yemen's capital clash with police. Most of them are university students, and they say they're sick and tired of Ali Abdullah Saleh's regime.
I turned to my blog at that time because I thought that was part of, the citizen journalism. And I was having censorship from the newspaper that I was working at. And then I started to get hate comments, death threats that targeted not only myself, but also my family. And just to make a long story short, I happened to go to Sweden during that time. And I decided when I was there to stay because I was getting death threats and I wanted to continue covering Yemen from afar. And then Yemen never really saw a peaceful period after that time. So in 2014, the Houthi armed group stormed into the capital.
The president's residence came under attack, followed by the nearby presidential palace, which was apparently looted by Houthi rebels. Witnesses described the security forces as apparently giving up. The Houthis' leader says it came to this point because of the president's unwillingness to negotiate with them.
And then in 2015, the Saudi-led coalition started the military operation in Yemen.
These pilots are part of the Saudi-led coalition against the Shia Houthi rebels and their military supporters in Yemen. For a second night, the alliance says it hit military positions in the capital Sana'a and the cities of Taiz and Sa'da. Houthis say there have been civilian casualties.
And then after that, the the pandemic started, which restricted everyone's movement. And then I just thought myself, I just realized it's been almost 10 years not being able to be back in Yemen. But when I look back, I think someone like me with the type of work that I do, I would have definitely been behind the bars.
After being exiled in Sweden for more than a decade, in 2022, you were able to go back to Yemen for a little bit during a truce in the conflict. Can you take us back to when you first arrived in the capital, Sana'a? What did the country look like? What did you do during your time there?
So I went back to Yemen. I was there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I went to Aden, I went to Sana'a, just going around. At that time, the airport wasn't functioning, so I had to take as a road trip between the cities, so especially from Aden to Sana'a. It was terrifying, to say the least. The checkpoints that I was going through with a relative of mine was extremely terrifying. And I remember just feeling anxious and having cramps and just sick in my stomach all the time. And when I think back about that time, I try to have some humor on it and say that it felt as if I was James Bond going to a dangerous place and trying to, just have a mission accomplished. It was not Sana'a that I knew. Houthi control of Sana'a was clear everywhere with the slogans that they had, which is death to America, death to Israel, etc. And the pictures of killed child soldiers' images were almost everywhere in the streets.
A United Nations report documented the recruitment of more than 800 child soldiers in 2017 in Yemen, some as young as 11. But a Geneva-based human rights group says the number of child soldiers fighting in the conflict is much higher.
You could be in the wrong place at the wrong time and just be arrested, whether you are political or not. So all these people who are arrested could be activists, could be journalists, could be ordinary citizens. There is shocking number of reports from human rights groups of people who have died in custody in Houthi prisons under severe torture. And then, of course, there are the failures in governance by the Houthi armed group, like not paying salaries for thousands of people working in the civil sector for so many years. So it's impossible that you forget about the war when you're there.
Yeah, I talked to a colleague today who recently went back, just like you, for the first time in years, and was struck that there was safety, but a constant presence of fear. How are your friends and families doing economically, trying to just make ends meet?
So when I was back in Sana'a, even in Aden, I was really shocked of how many beggars were seen on the street. And then also, I was shocked with the stories from the people that I know, people selling their savings to make ends meet. People have lost, so many people have lost their jobs. It's just shocking level of poverty that I've never seen before. And it's not exaggeration to say that also in every household there is someone who's sick amidst the collapse of the healthcare system in the country. Even myself, I had to, just 1 year ago, I had to grapple with the news that my mother was diagnosed with cancer. Thank God she made it, but because we were lucky, we were able to have the means to get her out of Yemen, which is an extreme luxury that so many Yemenis cannot afford today.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not lucky enough to be able to leave the country, which very few people are, it's really tough, really tough. So it seems clear that the Houthis are feeling themselves right now. This is a moment of extreme confidence, at least outwardly speaking. They are taking the fight to Israel. They are taking the fight to the United States. And maybe that goes back to this idea that they're very good at war, but struggle in peace. So when you keep using military solutions against the Houthis, it's actually giving them exactly what they want. So how do you counter that? How do you change the way you confront and you dialogue with the Houthis?
Houthis do exist in the way they are because of the failure of their enemies. I truly believe there were a huge number of mistakes in the way all these actors intervened in Yemen. There could have been other ways. Just, listen directly to what Yemenis are telling you in terms of reconciliation and diplomacy and mitigating. I think the way forward is to strengthen the capacity of the Yemeni government.
Bringing it back to what we talked about at the beginning, we talked about this propaganda that the Houthis are so good at. What is it missing? What do you wish that people who consume this propaganda can also know in alongside those images and that message?
I wish the international audience paying attention to Yemen today with all these flashy songs and interesting images from the Red Sea. I wish they know more of the background of the politics in Yemen that led to where we are today. Usually I say Yemen is like a long Mexican soap opera, and I wish nobody comes at the end of that soap opera, like let's say at the 600th episode, and assume that they know what happened in the first episode. I wish people are more educating themselves to know about the complexity of the situation and not just fall for those songs and flashy images.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and sharing your story.
Thank you.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Marcos Bartolomé and Shraddha Joshi, with Duha Mossad, Noor Wazwaz, and me, Kevin Hirten, in for Malika Bilal. Special thanks to Abubakr al-Shamahi. This episode was edited by Alexandre Locke. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandre Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.